recorded, and by attendance, people are agreeing to be filmed and for the use of those sound and image recordings. Attendees are reminded not to disclose any personal information, as that would infringe the data protection rights of the individual. And those who are joining remotely, please ensure you mute your microphones when you're not speaking. Okay, first item, apologies for absence. So we have apologies from Councillor North, Councillor Ramsey and Councillor Russell. Do we have any declarations of interest? Disclosable or non?
I have an interest in 11B, which is an exemption. So I can go into more detail when we go into executive session, if that's okay.
Okay. Any other interests?
I also have one in 11B as well. We can discuss it.
Okay. Any other pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests? No? Okay. Chairman's announcements. So I've got one. So following at the annual statutory meeting, we agreed the date of this meeting and that all subsequent meetings will be on a 3-month cadence. The currently published schedule has the next meeting in 4 months' time. So I've discussed with the clerk and asked him to revise the dates of the future meetings of the committee, subject to everyone's agreement. So moving the meeting on the 5th of October to the 7th of September, the meeting on the 4th of January to the 7th of December, and the meeting on the 5th of April to the 15th of March. So now we move on to the public open session, which is an opportunity to adjourn for a period of up to 15 minutes to allow members of the public to put questions or address the council through the chairman, pertaining to matters listed on the agenda. Have we got any members of the public in attendance who wish to speak?
There's no members of the public in attendance.
Okay. Thank you. So we move straight on to minutes of the meeting. So we have the minutes of the Finance and General Purposes meeting of Tuesday, the 19th of January 2021. So going through for accuracy first, anything on page 1, page 2, page 3, or page 4. Okay, so I'll propose from the chair that we accept those as accurate. Do I have a seconder? Yeah. Thank you. And all in favour? Okay, thank you very much. And then moving on to matters arising then. So firstly, page 1, page 2, page 3. Councillor Fate.
I actually had one on page 2, just about the asset register, and sometime when we're able to see what our new asset register looks like. I know this was raised at council, I think, but just a little reminder.
Like, respond? Okay. I reminded our colleagues today to send out the asset register to all members. It's I would say 95% complete. Still needs some more work on it, but there's no reason why members can't look at it now and understand where we are. I've reminded it again.
Yeah, thank you. So page 3 again. Councillor Knight.
Item D, the grants and sponsorship policy. So it was resolved that a draft policy would be submitted to the F&GP meeting on the 13th of July. So do we have a F&GP meeting on the 13th of July? And if not, when will that be submitted, please?
Well, we don't have one on the 13th of July. I think the chair just described what the future meeting timetable would be. So the meetings are on the 7th of September, 7th of December and 15th of March, if I recall. Is that correct, Chair?
Yeah.
We can expect that maybe on the 7th of September.
Okay. Yeah. Philip, can you join us?
Yes.
Can you let Councillor Knight know where you are with this particular piece of work, please?
Yes, I mean, the reason why it hasn't been started is because with the current meeting cycle, And this meeting taking place now, in fact, it was due to take place in April, and of course we have revised the meeting schedule. This is a very busy time in terms of other work we have to do, which is time constrained, particularly which I'm working on at the moment, the figures for the annual return of the report and accounts, which is going to council. So there really hasn't been time to move this on. If we were going to July, then we could at least have got it started and given you a progress report. But at this stage, we're still looking at the policy as was written, as it says in the minute on the 9th of August 2016, but haven't really made any decisions yet about what the grants and sponsorship policies should be for the next financial year. And in fact, it's not really for 2021-22. I should point out that we're already in 2021-22. It will apply to grants that will be administered by this council for the 2022-23 financial year and on from there.
Philip, can I interject? I mean, I'm conscious of what you've said, and it's entirely correct. But I think we did promise to get a report together, so I can't see any reason why we can't create anything for the next meeting, which is on the 7th of September. Can we commit to doing it by then?
Well, yes, I think that's what I'm really trying to say, that now we're coming to the end of what is, the busy period in terms of, annual meetings and annual returns and all the rest of it. We have a little bit of a hiatus in which we can begin to look at this. We will have to have it in place in any case, as I'm trying to indicate, because given the revised programme, the grants will have to be looked at, I would think, in the December meeting, and we normally give a deadline of the 31st of December for it to be considered in January. So actually bringing it forward means that we're going to have to look at all the dates and the time frame for submitting grants. So it will have to go to the September meeting in order to allow people enough time to put in their grant applications for you to consider them in December, councillors.
All right, perfect, thank you.
Okay, anything else on page 3 and page 4 then? Yes, Councillor Albo.
Yeah, it was resolved to defer the Allotment Association's grant application in the last meeting. I wonder if you can know what the status of that is.
Yeah, we have had 2 meetings with the chair of the Allotment Association and with his son. We've not quite finished those discussions because there's a lot going on in the allotments at the moment. In the next couple of weeks, I think those conversations will be concluded upon, and we can refresh again as to whether or not it's appropriate to consider.
Okay, so we move on to items for consideration. Item 7A, credit and debit card report. Mr. Tuppin, are you speaking to this?
Yes, coming in and out of view, as it were. The position with the debit credit cards is that the town clerk has now been issued with a debit card. He's the only holder of a debit card at the moment. We need to be looking at the regulations for the use of those cards, because the background to my paper is that it's basically all embracing, covering the future when other members of the staff, other officers, may be issued with either a credit or a debit card. And I've, in my preamble, put in what the current financial regulations are. There's difficulties with prepaid debit cards because our bank doesn't actually issue one. I've made some recommendations, but what I'm asking councillors to do, please, is first of all to look at the procedures which are based upon a set of procedures that I've been working with Mike Platten, who is our advisor on financial matters and the author of the paper that you'll be looking at, well, what the main author of the paper that we'll be looking at later. There are several items in those procedures which I would like members to look at, and if you're satisfied that they are appropriate, to approve them because then we'll be in a position, if and when we extend as a council the issue of some sort of procurement card, whether it's credit or debit, to other members of the staff with appropriate limits, which will have to be decided if you adopt all of this by this committee, which is what is in the current financial regulations anyway. So that's what I'm asking for members to consider, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, do we have any comments from members? I think Councillor Page.
Yeah, I like this. I was very comfortable with pretty much all of it. I just had two very small minor comments. And bear in mind, I think a lot of the way that this is outlined and explaining what certain members will and won't be able to do, I think the added flexibility will help us as a council as we grow, but also with sufficient controls to make sure that we're not that we're being diligent with money, etc. So, I mean, my only two comments were on 2.6 and the agreement of overall credit limits for individuals who might have credit cards. My only comment was whether that should be considered by F&GP rather than council. I just feel the challenge will be better at a committee level rather than with 15 councillors, many of whom are not close to this kind of detail. Very many of whom, as you can see, there's only 5 of us here today, and no reason why I would necessarily need to be involved in that. My only other comment, and again, I'm splitting hairs slightly, but I'm just thinking of worst case scenarios. So 2.12, if a card is lost or stolen, the card holder must contact the bank as soon as possible to notify them of loss or theft. They must also notify the town clerk and chief executive as soon as possible and within 5 days. I was just thinking whether we could be slightly stricter on that 5 days. I'd be very worried if a member of staff took any longer than maybe 2 days or even 1 day if there were an incident of fraud or theft. But those are my only two comments. Otherwise, I'm perfectly happy to propose this.
Councillor Knight.
Thank you. So I agree with Councillor Page on the 2.6 comment in relation to F&GP. I think that would be more appropriate. And I agree, maybe we should have slightly more aggressive targets for reporting loss. I'm a little uncertain as to whether the preference of this is recommending the report is to shift towards credit cards, and that's why there's a proposal to strike the reference to prepaid debit cards, or whether you'd prefer to allow both. I think my preference is that I think credit cards, because they have a credit limit, offer greater protection. So I would certainly like to see the use of credit cards preference to other financial sort of instruments wherever possible. I guess I question whether a debit card is ever required, and if so, as I understand as written, is the proposal that it would only be the town clerk who would have a debit card, and therefore all other staff would only have the option of a credit card. Is that the correct understanding?
Want to talk first, Philip?
Yes, perhaps I'll answer the last question first from Councillor Knight. I think, yes, in terms of practice, that would seem to be a sensible way forward. Whether you wish to sort of modify the guidance or leave it to F&GP, who would have to decide what the appropriate cards are and what the appropriate limits are for members of staff other than the town clerk. So procedurally, I think that's absolutely correct. There is more security with credit cards, with credit limits. We would probably also ask this committee to set an individual transaction limit within that credit limit as well for members of staff who are other than the town clerk. So that's the first point. The other points that were raised, I think Councillor Page is absolutely right. I think it's bad drafting on my part because I took this from another document. Council has been put in there, but I think it should read F&GP, because if you go to my preamble report, basically that's what the financial regulations say at the moment anyway, limits to be set by F&GP. On the 2.12, The only thing I would say is that the bank should be told immediately, because that would stop other transactions on the card. You probably do need a couple of days, just in case this sort of happens on a bank holiday or a weekend or something like that, and the member of staff is not able to contact anybody until the Monday. So maybe sort of 48 hours might be more appropriate, but I think you need a little bit more time than immediately. Just operationally is what I'm trying to say, Mr. Chairman.
Were you going to add to that?
I would just reiterate what I think. I'm inclined to agree with members. I think 5 days is too long. A maximum of 48 hours.
2 working days, maybe.
Yeah.
Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we're moving in the right direction. I actually would like a little bit more detail on the practical implementation as it would be proposed to be worked within the council, in terms of the theory is right, but we don't actually have details in terms of limits, how people become entitled to it. Credit cards to me feel safer than debit cards. I think we need, this is a starting point in my view rather than the finishing point. I would actually like to see a proposal as to the parameters of staff who would be using it and the kinds of practical details of using it. All right, the financial regulations have to be wide, but I think we need to have a procedure in place as to how they should be used. In the same way as at some stage with regard to banking arrangements, we're going to, if we're using back payments, there's going to have to be procedures in as who authorises and signs these off. So I think it's important that we get all that covered. As to the reporting side, I don't think that
Hello, Frank.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm trying to get hold of Sunday in the office because I think it's fallen over at their end.
Okay.
Oh dear.
Oh dear, dear. Never mind.
Leave a message after the beep.
Hello, Helen. It's Philip here. I've tried to phone Peter, but he went to voicemail as well. I think the live stream has fallen over at your end. Something like what happened the other day with the internet. Something's unstable, but we are out of the loop, unfortunately. It's Councillor Frank Foster and myself. Thank you. Bye.
So, how good are you at thumb twiddling? We can do this for a while.
Well, I don't know. I can't do somersaults anymore or juggling.
Me neither, definitely.
Not anymore.
Oh, sorry. There's a phone ringing in the next room. I thought it was me.
Right. Well, we've lost them. I think they'll have to carry on without us. Unfortunately, I've got other inputs. Hello.
Oh, that's the room.
That's the administrator.
Yeah. The administrator has left the building.
I can hear voices. If somebody comes into view, we'll try and attract their attention. But it's quite clear that the council chamber is not back in view.
Yeah.
It shouldn't happen. Excuse me.
Apologies to those people online. We did have a connectivity issue at the council offices. We are now back with you, and we will continue the meeting. I think we were with Councillor Fage.
Cameras off, so we're not timing, that's all.
Yeah, and those members of the public or people who are not currently contributing, if you can turn your cameras off. Thank you.
So I was going to make a proposal. So the proposal really is that we adopt this as laid out, with the exception of 2.6 changing the word council to F&GP, and then in 2.12 changing within 5 days to within 2 working days. So I'd like to propose that. I honestly think under 2.6 the conversation was just happening between Councillor Strawn and the clerk. I think we're at risk of getting too operational, and it's clear that transaction limits can be examined by F&GP if necessary. So I'd like to make that proposal, please.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say to members also is this is almost the start of beginning to implement the report that we've got here to talk about in a moment. It's the first bit of trying to put some detail around the change that we need to put in place. And we'll have that conversation in a moment, but we recognise that our current operating model is significantly behind most modern councils, significantly behind. And this is just the start of that journey, and hopefully this will help us. But there's a lot more detail to that.
Yeah. Councillor Knight. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hartman.
I did want to raise a point on 2.9. So that says when using an internet purchasing site, the user must delete the credit card details on completion of every transaction. I think that's a little confusing. I assume what we want to do is ensure that the details aren't stored by the retailer. And usually, when you're making a purchase, you don't get an opportunity delete any credit card details. They go as part of the transaction. They're not displayed anymore. But obviously, some retailers you can set them up to store the details of the credit card. So I think that's a little confusing, and I think the wording could perhaps be improved on that.
Councillor Knight.
A couple of points, if I may. So in relation to Councillor Albone's point, I agree that there is the issue of ongoing authority and subscriptions by credit card, which may be a reasonable thing for the council to consider for services like Zoom. And this would suggest that is not permitted. So that may be an area to consider clarifying. What I specifically wanted to respond to was Councillor Page's proposal, just to clarify and see if I can potentially second it. So the recommendations on the agenda are to approve the attached procedures, but then there's a second one, which is to consider whether we change regulation 6.18 to delete the reference to prepaid. And I just wondered whether that was part of Councillor Page's proposal, or that's going to be a separate proposal to consider point 2.
Consider whether to propose change financial regulation. Part of the proposal, but I think actually, given the conversation we had, that perhaps the will of this committee is that we edge towards credit cards rather than prepaid debit cards where possible.
So you'll make that part of your proposal?
Yes.
I would gladly second that.
Thank you.
Councillor Storm.
Just a question, does Councillor Page mean 2 working days, which at certain times of the year could be 5 or 6 days, say at Christmas, or does he mean within 2 days? Because if I'm correct, I think that every major bank will have the facility to have a telephone call within 48 hours, whether it's Christmas, New Year, or whatever. So I would 2 working days may be better than 5 days, but I think we don't need the word working if respect.
If I could just give my view on this, I think my reading of this is that actually the notification of the bank is required as soon as possible, not you don't have the 2 days grace for that. The 2 days is in reference to notifying the town clerk and chief executive only.
Okay.
Maybe it should be 2 days though. If you know the town clerk and chief exec is contactable in the instance of fraud, or we can keep it 2 working days.
So,
Without going into too much detail, I am available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay.
So if this were to happen and someone didn't tell me within 20 minutes of it happening, I'd want to know why.
Okay, I thought that might be the case.
May I come back then, without wishing to interfere in the operational side? I would be rather unhappy if it's only the town clerk who has to be notified, because if he was, say, God forbid, in hospital, who would be notified in those instances? So it might be or appointed deputy.
Okay, so for clarity, members will know that in the last 2 weeks we appointed a head of service. We didn't appoint the head of service particular to finance, but we did appoint a head of service. So when that person starts in the first week of August, they are not deputies. We have no deputy posts anymore, but they are second-tier management in the organisation. So, you know, we have some reliance now in some capacity, should I be unfortunate enough to be knocked over by a bus.
So, I mean, I think what I would say to Councillor Strawn there is lots of our policies and things will refer to the town clerk and chief executive doing things. It's for him to operationally have a delegation in place for anything that needs to be done in his absence, which would include this.
I think so, but it's just the important point that whether it needs definition point. You've got to shut me up.
Okay, I think we do have a proposal and that's been duly seconded. So I think if I can I'll repeat it for the record, and as far as it is to accept the recommendations with the modification of 2.6 to remove council and replace with F&GP, and then in 2.1 or 2.12 to remove 5 days and remove with 2 working days. Or is it 2 days? 2 days. And then in the recommendation 2 to remove the reference to debit cards and it's in reference to issuing of credit cards to staff other than the clerk.
Actually, to Councillor Albon's point on 2.9, I think we can alter the wording from the user must delete the credit card details to the user must
Not store.
check that it's not stored by. That's it.
Yeah, okay. All those in favour? Unanimous, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the financial request from Biggleswade Community News. Councillor Fage.
Propose that we, I like this, I think it's encouraging, but we have a process for this, for when grants are to be considered, and we did recently turn down somebody else on the grounds that it's outside of our annual grants cycle. So I would actually propose that we encourage them to come back in December time.
Okay. Councillor Knight.
So I would like to second that proposal. I'd also just like to comment that this request is a little bit anonymous in that there's no name on it. And I think for a community newsletter like this, I think I do receive it. I think it is broadly good, but I think we need to be very careful that it's not politically motivated in any way, because it wouldn't be good for the council to be supporting anything that was vaguely political. So I think when we consider it, there's probably some additional scrutiny to make sure that the publication is free of political interference or bias.
Mr. Clark.
Two things I'd like to comment on, I think. The first thing is that this request came from Shirley Leggett, who we all know, that if the council were to support her request at some point in time, this is supporting their financial structures to enable them to do the work that they do that complements our offer. This is not the council's newsletter. The council will create its own newsletter with its own comms officers, but it will welcome the support that Shirley and other colleagues in the community offer. The only thing I would mention to Councillor Fage and Councillor Knight is ordinarily I would agree wholeheartedly with what you just said. What's not clear from this report, but is clear from conversations that we've been having in the background, is that this, if we want to call it an organisation, is having some financial challenges at the moment and some organisational challenges at the moment. I know that a wide range of members welcome the hard work that they do, and I went on record very recently to thank them for the hard work that they're doing, and indeed the work that they did in regard to the neighbourhood plan, which was excellent. So as much as we can put it back till then, I think we need to also be thoughtful of our relationship with them.
Okay. Councillor Strong.
Yes, Chairman, if I may, I've got to know Shirley Leggett over a period of time from the neighbourhood local plan and various other parts, and she's discussed various things with me around the town, and I've got a copy of the newsletter that is freely available in newsagents free of charge. And surprisingly, it is very much an information-based newsletter. It is not, as far as I can see, political, though somebody called Grant Fage, Deputy Mayor of Biggleswade, seems to have got a page worth of mention in it. So,
all my proposal.
but that was factual about information being provided to the community. Now, I understand at the moment there's 4 people effectively running it and managing it and contributing to it financially. And I believe they've put in about £960, but it costs, I think, about £2,000 a year to produce. Now, I fully appreciate the fact that normally we don't do grants out of time, but this is, whether this is a grant or support for making it manageable, and we've got the opportunity to have input into it, an editorial comment into it, to provide information, CBC provide information on it, and there's something from our Ivor Bereavement Support Service, and there may be opportunities for them to do so. So if it is possible within aid ambit and within a budget to give a little bit of interim financial support to show that the council is in principle supportive of the idea, and then perhaps we could have even a presentation about what it is about at another either finance meeting or council meeting. I think that would be greatly appreciated, because I do know that it is a considerable burden, not only financially but time-wise, on the people who run it, and I think it's well worth supporting. And I think we should be doing so, and I'd move an amendment that we do, even if it's an interim sum, to keep it ticking over pending further consideration.
I'm not sure we can accept that amendment as such, because I think it does negate the proposal. However, we are obviously free to, you are free to withdraw it if you wish, or we can vote it down if necessary. But Councillor Elback.
I agree with what Councillor Strawn has just said. I believe we have discretion to consider grants outside of the normal process. What I'm not clear about is how much the organisation is actually asking for. I'm misread it, but I can't see a particular sum. Perhaps the town clerk can help us on that.
Not going to be very helpful here, but I'll just make a statement of fact. I've spoken to Shirley about this. Unfortunately, we do not have a definitive figure. And, you know, it's not for us to adapt to somebody else's request. So I think that's probably a judgment for members.
Councillor Knight.
So this is difficult, and I don't have the benefit of knowing individuals concerned, unfortunately. I think we have to be very fair. We have received a number of out of sequence requests, and I think it's very difficult unless something is genuinely exceptionally urgent for us to consider one request when we have rejected other requests. And this is why I asked when we would be able to review the policy, because I think reviewing grants only once per year is probably inadequate, and I would like to see a process where we review grants maybe twice per year, which would allow us to be more responsive to organisations that have an urgent need. But I think, you know, considering requests in isolation without considering the budget could potentially mean that we've spent budget which we might have used in another way when we consider applications that have followed the correct process. I don't think there's enough information here to make a decision, and I would be looking to know, although I agree that believe that it's good and it's not overtly political, I'd look to have some assurances that it will remain neutral if it's going to be publicly funded. At the moment, I'd like to continue my support for Councillor Fage's proposal.
Councillor Fage.
Maybe there's a way around this then, because I was genuinely concerned that this is an anonymous, because that's how it appears. I'm not comfortable giving money to people who are not even prepared to disclose their name, but obviously Shirley has them, which is great. And I have looked at the newsletter, although I didn't spot my own name in it, but not that would have swayed me either way. So I enter into this totally with an open mind. So maybe there's a way around this. What more information? It's pretty clear that they're hard up against it, and they're trying to get something off the ground, which is a unique thing. And it is clear that they're having some community benefit, particularly for those who are quite hard to reach in our community, which I think needs to carry some weight as well. Maybe we don't necessarily make a decision this evening, but urge Shirley to come back with something to council in a couple of weeks' time, if they can hold on until then, with perhaps some slightly more clarity over kind of how much they're looking for. Because, you know, they're saying here they want to do 12 pages A5 booklet and it will cost this much. Do they want to do that immediately? Because they're struggling at the moment. So why are they trying to upscale? So I'd just like a little bit more clarity over that before committing funds. But that's my view.
Councillor Storm.
I would be happy if the opportunity is there for a bit more detail to be brought to council and a presentation. I know from a couple of conversations I've had with Shirley and a couple of emails that she was struggling to get the information to us for tonight, and which is why it's not there. This was an initial pitch, I think, if I could put a better description to the town clerk to say that something was needed, and I think there's been a bit of difficulty in getting the final I's dotted and T's crossed or pound signs inserted. So I'd be more than happy that it gets postponed in the way Councillor Fage is there for the purpose of obtaining further information.
So I believe we've got effectively an amendment proposed to your proposal to defer to council rather than to defer to the process at the end of the year. Are you happy to accept that amendment?
We can always, the clerk's listened to the conversation. He has a good relationship with Shelley Leggett and can provide her with perhaps some hints as to what council might be looking for there.
Councillor Knight, are you happy to second that amended resolution? Clark,
just a quick comment because we've got lots to go through. Obviously, the policy should be the point of reference in everything that we do. It's the policy that we should follow. However, we should also have foresight, I think, to be able to think outside of the policy if the policy allows us to do such. I seem to remember doing an update to council very recently on this very subject. The policy does allow us to make decisions outside of the parameters that we've just discussed. When I also spoke about this last, I think I reported that we were underspent. I can't remember the exact figures, but I think it was between £4,000, £5,000, £6,000, £7,000. So that there is an underspend there. So, I'm just setting the scene connected to it.
Well, we have a proposal proposed and seconded. I think on the underspend, I think it's difficult to say where we are underspent this financial year as we've not been through the grant cycle at the end of December yet. So, is everyone clear on the proposal? So it's to defer consideration of this to council to be supported by further information around the specifics of the request.
Specifically, the upcoming council meeting, if possible, given that's only a fortnight away.
Yeah. Okay, all in favour? Thank you. Which brings us on to the website. Do you want Helen? Yeah.
So the report that I've written is on approving additional costs for Tim's Digital for the next phases of work. So it will be the 6 months worth of costs at £558 a month. So the work includes calendars for various services, as well as allowing members of the public to pay for our website.
Can I propose that the committee adopts the recommendation, please?
Secondly, Councillor, any comment?
Yeah. So in 6 months, will we be done? Will we be comfortable that our staff are trained enough to use the website and we won't need Tim again? Or do we think this is, the only thing I'm conscious of is, and I see it where I work quite a bit, sometimes work is dragged out by some of these people that we have a bit of a dependency on. I'm not saying he's like that. I've met him, he seems very, very good and very capable, but I just want to be comfortable where we'll be in 6 months' time if we support this.
Perhaps it might be appropriate, Helen, for Councillor Fage's benefit, just to talk for a few moments around the schedule of work that you've put together and the way that we've prioritised that. And I think the council, with its support, has done amazing work with members on getting us to where we are today. And this is taking us even to a further point. It looks great on our website now. Even people who've commented on me today about how good it looks. This takes it to another level. And it's not about dependency. It's actually making that additional leap forward to make it even better. Do you want to describe the priorities?
So up until the end of July, we'll be working on content. So that was deemed most important thing for residents to have up-to-date information. So I'll be working on that up until July, and then Tim's work, if this were to be approved, for calendars and allowing members of the public to pay for our different services, that will begin at the start of August, and that will continue until February. So,
understood. Okay.
Councillor Strong.
Just from a practical point of view, I believe we have a kind of support contract in any event on a monthly basis. And here we've got certain works that need to be carried out. If he was able to carry it out and complete it quicker than the timescale, I presume we'd just be paying for this effectively a 6-month contract. Is that right? Or so if he completed the work early, in 2 months, say, rather than all this time, Well, I imagine, would we be paying the full amount here? I'm not actually certain.
Okay. Yes, so on speaking with Tim on the work that we expect to be completed, it will take 6 months. I'm not quite sure of.
So he might, but if he spent 4 months, 4 hours this month and 4 hours next month, 4 hours next month, then he'd completed the number of hours that he would need, if I've understood it correctly.
So being very succinct, the work that we've specified and worked up and consulted with other members will take that period of time at that cost.
Right.
There is no opportunity to fast forward it at a greater speed. That it'll be delivered during that time at that cost.
Right, so it'll be all done and delivered in the 6 month period.
That's the night.
If I may attempt to explain it a different way. So my understanding is the 6 month duration is in part due to our own resourcing constraints and the time of staff. This provides us the support we need on the telephone or on Zoom and the engineering support in partnership with the team here to deliver these features.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have a proposal duly seconded. All those in favour? Yeah. Thank you, Helen.
To put the screen on in the back office on, turn the camera off, because I think that's how it shows up on Zoom, on YouTube as well.
And they're not very attractive flowers in the middle of those desks, are they, in the train?
Okay, so we move on to items of information. So all update from the Town Clerk and Chief Executive on the asset register. Is there anything further from your earlier update?
Only to say that just a few positive observations, I guess. The asset register and contract database, as you know, didn't exist some months back. And I just want to thank the officers who've been involved in this for their hard work in creating something fresh, completely new, basically. We're not there yet, but we're nearly there. So if I could ask for a member's forbearance in actually getting this across the line. Obviously, I want to commit today, as I've committed before, to be absolutely sure that you will get a copy of the asset bank database and you will get a copy of the contracts database in the next few days so that you can see what we're doing. I would say, though, there's been an enormous amount of hard work recently. For instance, with the asset register, every single piece of equipment that the council owns, and I mean every single piece of equipment, has now been barcoded and is in that asset register. Yeah. So there's been a huge amount of work from Tracy and from Sean in going around and barcoding everything. So at long last, we've got some real clarity about what we own and what we manage as an asset. So there's some really good work connected to that. I think there's some more work to be finished in properly understanding all of our capital assets. Yeah. It's been a difficult challenge to make sure we capture all of that information, because some of it is almost, with respect to previous management of the town council, going back to archivist type records and actually trying to find hard copies of deeds that existed at the time. There was no clean point of reference. So there's been some real hard work connected to this. So we're almost there.
Okay, thank you. So I think you covered items A and B there. So any questions or comments, Councillor Scott?
Just a question on the contracts database. We're delighted to hear the progress that's being made. But as far as contracts are concerned, do we have lists of approved suppliers or anything like that that the council goes to, or anything, or is that something that you're considering in the future?
The latter, and we most definitely don't have approved suppliers. So yes, but what we do have, and I think I mentioned to you before, and I'm delighted with it, Nina Villa, who we know finished with us last month, was able to offer us a standard contract that is clear and precise from a Biggleswade perspective, that we're now going to be offering to our suppliers. It will need to be varied in individual instances, but at least we have our own terms and conditions that we can offer now, whereas before we were adopting others or we had no contract in place.
Thank you. So any other notes? So we'll move on to item 8C, the financial risk assessment.
Okay. Philip, would you be able to join us, please, and give us an update, please?
Yes, here I am again. Yes, financial risk assessment really hasn't moved on. I'll be absolutely upfront with councillors. What I was hoping, perhaps I've misunderstood what was minuted last time, but what I was hoping that I was going to get an input from councillors Pullinger and councillor Grant Fage, who'd offered very kindly to sort of help with that. And I guess it's sort of all got a bit lost in other work that we've been doing. But if I could get together with the two named councillors, which was in the resolution from last time, at least get some templates, then I can begin to move on and work on this again. Now is the time to be doing these sorts of tasks after we've got the first quarter statutory stuff, for want of a better term, out of the way.
I can't speak for Councillor Fage, but I think it's probably just a breakdown in communication. Because I think, for my part, I was probably waiting for you to set something up.
Oh,
and,
oh dear.
So, Councillor Fage.
I was going to say, I think Councillor Pullinger and I actually agreed at the end of the last F&GP meeting that we would sit down and do it at some point. But I think we realised that doing these sort of things over Zoom is very tricky when you're having quite detailed conversations. So that kind of didn't happen. But also, given the document that we're about to consider under exempt, there are some quite fundamental changes to our processes, to our controls, and to the potential risks which we may be running at the moment, but hopefully we won't be in a even in 3 months' time, given what that proposal looks like. So it depends. It's a question about whether we want to spend more staff time on this now, given the scale of the change that is going to come. Or whether we pause and wait for some of that execution to begin. But there you go.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So next item was
Sorry. Actually, could clarify, where are we at the moment? Is it being suggested that we delay looking into preparing this updated financial risk assessment until we've looked at the financial review that we're discussing later and the proposals there? What's the way?
So, Mr. Talent, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I support what Councillor Fade has said. So if we go back several months, when this was offered to members, the situation was very, very different. When you take into consideration the document that we will be looking at later, that puts in a completely different situation. So the context has changed significantly.
That's what I was just trying to clarify. In view of what we're discussing later, it seems you're effectively saying it's inappropriate for us to progress this without having taken into account what's being discussed later. That's what I wanted to clarify, that it was actually a rational reason for deferment, shall we say.
I think there's probably something that Councillor Fage and myself can do in terms of the template element, and share that with officers prior to being in a position to actually fill that in. But the filling in really needs to wait until after the.
No, I accept that fully, but I just wanted to clarify exactly what we were doing, because otherwise it can come up again and says, why haven't we done this? I understand the reasons why, and that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, any more comments? Then we'll move on to item 8D, the grants and sponsorship. I know you covered that earlier. Is there anything else to add?
There's not.
No. Okay. Which brings us on to item 9. Public open session. Do we have any members of the public in attendance at the moment? I'm assuming not. In which case,
we do not have any members of the public present.
Okay, thank you. So we move on to item 10. So I'll move from the chair that we move into an exempt session to discuss the final 2 items. Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
Thank you.